Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. My name is Nico van der Brink. I'm half Dutch, half Spanish. I'm an MBA alum from the full-time MBA in '95, 15 years in banking across Europe, 5 years of headhunting, and now I'm part of the school for 5 years now, first in career services, and now I'm heading off admissions for the Global Executive MBA. And here with me is Pascal Michels.
Hi everybody. Nico and I have a couple of things in common. I'm also a graduate of the full-time MBA. I graduated in 2010. I worked with Citigroup in London for 3 years after graduation and joined IESE in 2013, working with for Nico, I should say, in career services for 4 years. And I've just recently taken over the full-time MBA admissions department here at IESE. So let's just jump right into the presentation. What we like to begin with when we introduce our school is highlighting our mission. The fact that IESE is a value-driven institution, and across our existence and across all programs that we run, there's a common mission which essentially consists in developing leaders who aspire to have a positive, deep and lasting impact on their communities and during their careers, right? So we achieve this through the main components of teamwork. Teamwork at IESE is something that goes perhaps a little bit beyond what the term normally means to people. I think we're going to have the opportunity to discuss how teamwork is practiced in the different programs. Of course, none of this works without humility. And by humility, we mean perhaps above all the willingness to learn from others, whatever their background, which implies respect, and that is very necessary given the truly international, the global nature of the programs that we run here. I don't know if you want to chip in, Nico, but maybe a few points about the advantage of doing an MBA at a European institution, right? And this is nothing new. Many of you will know this from your own research already, but at European institutions, generally, the degree of diversity is higher, simply because we have a higher number of nationalities on campus. International character of European schools, and certainly at IESE, is very developed, and that translates into the way we are set up from a career services perspective, and the overall program management infrastructure, which is also very international. One thing that IESE, and this is point number 3, one thing that IESE does really well on top of teaching business administration is facilitating the acquisition of Spanish as a new language, or improving your Spanish level. It is something that we do deliberately, and that many of our candidates find attractive. And obviously the outcome of all of this is that IESE is giving you access to a global network. We have more than 45,000 alumni currently, and across the globe, with new alumni chapters opening on a regular basis as this global dimension increases over time. And ultimately, and I think this is probably what comes closest to being the USP of IESE, our programs are transformational. Right? We aim to achieve our mission through an increase in self-awareness, better understanding of self for all our candidates, regardless of which program they participate in. And this is ultimately what we think is going to allow them to be better leaders with a positive impact on their communities.
And let me add to that. I think I can't stress enough the first point, diversity. Actually, the whole admissions process is geared on diversity. So actually we select on diversity, and diversity in terms of countries living, sectors, roles and functions. So the diverser the class, the richer the class discussion, and the richer the understanding of the views of people from other parts of the world and other sectors in industry.
So yes, and simply also because I mean I know that we're talking to an audience of people who have likely done their homework. We are well aware that these are European MBA advantages, right? So we are well aware that most institutions in Europe, provide similar degrees of diversity. What is perhaps specific to IESE is what we do with the diversity, right? And then that is a conversation more about the teaching method, which is to the extent it's possible exclusively through cases, meaning that whenever we can, we will use a business case, a case study as an instrument of teaching. And the key component of all our teaching is your team, a team of, in the case of the full-time MBA, 8 or 9 students that are, again, teams are designed to maximize diversity within them. And on a daily basis, when you work through the cases, this is where the confrontation with diversity takes place. And this is ultimately what drives most of the transformation that we try to achieve. Do you want to say a few things about
Well, the only thing where I agree, in the full-time MBA, the diversity is a given in most of the programs. In the executive MBAs, it's not. And in the global executive MBA, we truly have a class from around the world that goes around the world. So there, the diversity and globality of the class is 85% of our students are outside of Spain, and 60% of our students are from outside of Europe.
Mm-hmm. So interesting, because these are the same metrics as for the full-time MBA.
So very similar metrics for the full-time MBA and an executive MBA. Okay.
Good. Let's have a look at the next slide. I think we've touched upon this, right? I mean, this is reasons to choose IESE specifically. I think we've covered the global character of the classroom, and then in the case of the global executive MBA, that's obviously logistically even the case. Whereas the full-time MBA takes place here in Barcelona. There are a few exchange opportunities and international modules that can be bolted on, but it's a Barcelona-based program. Our executive MBAs take place in Barcelona, Madrid, and Sao Paulo. We're currently working on developing one in Munich, but it's not live yet. Another aspect which perhaps goes undiscussed in most business school, in most MBA conversations, is that of academic rigor. And I think that maybe IESE should be a little bit more vocal about how academically focused it is. I don't know if you want to chip in here, Nico. I can talk forever.
We don't talk about it a lot because for us it's part of our DNA, but just for instance, the fact that 100% of our professors have a PhD from the top institutions, the way they all strive for excellence. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about our professors is the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So our professors spend 1/3 of their time teaching across programs. So they teach both on the full-time executive, global executive, and the executive education programs. But they spend also 1/3 in work on research for academics. The other third, they're actually in the field, sitting on boards of corporations or doing consulting work. So that keeps our professors, besides being academically relevant and cutting edge, also very much grounded into what's happening in firms and society. So
yeah, it's the hand motion signals it. It's a virtuous circle, really, because not only do our professors have access to real world live experience through the consulting work they do, but they also teach the same subjects and to a very large extent the same case studies across the different programs, which means that you may have in the full-time MBA, for example, a case discussion with a professor who has just delivered that case during a custom program or during the global executive MBA with more senior leaders, and will bring into the classroom the shared experience from that different constituency. And I think cross-fertilization is an overused buzzword in management, but I think it really applies here. There's a lot of information and experience flow between the programs and between outside the business school and inside. I don't know if you want to speak to leadership development.
Leadership development, again, it's a general management MBA. It's very much focused about the leadership. It's all about you. So it's a very personalized approach. All of our professors know all of our students and staff same by name and background. So it's very much about your journey throughout the program. And that's the same for all of our programs, even though the structures may differ. So the leadership development actually comes back to the transformational experience Pascal mentioned before. It's really about you, your journey, and becoming a better person and a better leader moving forward.
Yeah, the way I like to put it when I talk to applicants, and we get the leadership question quite a lot, which hints at the fact that maybe the term is not, that not everybody agrees on what leadership means. I think one of the assumptions we make here at IESE is that leading others starts with leading yourself. And leading yourself means being in control, or if you're not in control, at least being cognizant, being aware of your emotional household. If you recognize your own emotions and how they affect you, this in turn will allow you to manage other people's emotions. And in times of crisis, once you're out of IESE, once you graduate into the real world and gain in seniority in your organizations, it's really in times of crisis that this muscle that you exercise during the program gets tested, becomes useful, right? And as Nico says, this is the transformation we hope to achieve with our participants. I don't know if we should spend too much time on the bilingual nature of the program. Maybe just in case, I mean, in order to avoid confusion, classes in Spanish during the full-time MBA are optional. It is something that we offer once you achieve a certain level of fluency in Spanish. The opportunity to learn Spanish as a foreign language also exists, but it is, of course, it is perfectly possible to complete your studies at IESE without speaking any Spanish. If that was not the case, we would not be the global institution that we are.
Yeah, actually, they're not even an option on the Global Executive.
So Global Executive MBA is all in English. Our Executive MBAs come in different flavors. So there are versions of it here in Spain that are taught only in Spanish, but then there's also the International Executive MBA taught in Madrid, which teaches in English. The Sao Paulo MBA, I think, is a blend of Portuguese and English, and in Munich, we'll probably still have to decide on what it is that we're going to be doing there. The last point, number 5 here. Entrepreneurship, yes. So entrepreneurship is a vast topic. I think I mean, obviously, as a top institution, we teach entrepreneurship as part of the core curriculum of our different programs. We have experts in the field that do relevant research and share it in the classrooms. We have a very vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem around IESE, within the IESE community, which means that you have a lot of interesting speakers and lecturers coming to the classroom. But beyond that, if you go back to the idea of students spending most of the time discussing case studies in teams and then in very high pressure classroom environments, I think one of the intangible entrepreneurial advantages of studying at IESE is that this constant confrontation with diversity means that you're going to spend time and connect with people who are very different from yourself. And that in turn means that you're very likely to encounter and again, create a strong bond with people who cover your blind spots. And if you accept the notion that one of the 3 main reasons why entrepreneurial ventures fail is the fact that the founding team was ill-aligned or just breaks up during the process, I think that's a very powerful benefit that comes as a side effect almost of how we go about the teaching here at IESE. Yeah, no disagreements?
No disagreements.
Good. I mean, this is the mandatory slide where we show the different campuses we have across the world. So Barcelona is, as I said, the one where we host our full-time MBA, but then you can also see our locations in New York, Sao Paulo, Munich, and Madrid. And as I pointed out, we run an executive MBA in Sao Paulo, 2 in Madrid, and 1 in Barcelona, and 1 in Munich is in the works.
Yeah, and then the Global Executive MBA is actually taught on all of these campuses. So it starts in Barcelona, it goes to New York, back to Barcelona, Silicon Valley, Shanghai, and then with modules in New York, Sao Paulo, Madrid, Asia, and Africa. So it's truly a global school, but just the fact that we have campuses around the world actually demonstrates our global perspective, and also the fact that we have a mission to be global. Opening up a campus in the US, where business schools traditionally come from, is a strong statement.
Yeah, I would agree. Yes, definitely the most difficult of all markets. Now, this is the slide that gives you a bit of an overview of the different MBA programs available. I think we've touched upon it, but you may see here that in terms of level of seniority, right? I mean, we put the biological age, but you also have the average work experience, which is probably the more relevant data point. You can also see that our MBAs are staggered along the early to mid-career years, right? So I'm going to speak here about the full-time MBA really quickly. As you can see, our average work experience is 5 years. We do have participants with as little as 2.5. These tend to be less than 2% of each class. We're talking about certain sponsored consultants from large strategy firms, for example, but they need to be really able to demonstrate that they've had a very intense 2.5 years of work experience. And on the other hand, often within the sponsored Asian corporate executive population, we tend to have students up to 35, 36 years. So you can see that the average has quite a wide range of levels of experience. I think the rest we've covered. The executive MBA, I think we've also said quite a bit about. You can see that the profile is perhaps slightly more experienced. And then Nico, maybe.
I think at the end of the day, we're looking. It's the same person in different phases of their life. So typically, people that come to the Global Executive MBA are the ones that would have done the full-time MBA 10 years before, but for whatever reasons were unable to, right? So across the board, across programs, we look at international people, high performance, who want to make a difference and are looking to make a big step in their careers and their lives.
Great. I don't know if there are any questions at this point already. Should we just keep going?
Well, maybe we can ask
There's 2 more slides, or we take questions now.
Maybe just to break the information. Yeah. So Anas is asking if only MBAs take profit of having campus all over the world.
So maybe, I mean, this calls for different answers, right? But I think the Global Executive MBA answer is probably the most immediate one.
So I think, first of all, it focuses at the same person in a different phase in their life. So look more at your work experience, then you know what the right program is for you. And in terms of the different campuses, so shall I focus on the global? So the Global Executive MBA, in order to have people who literally live around the world, the class is actually going around the world. So otherwise we would become a regional program, like there are many. In our program, we have 30% of people living in the Americas, another 25% living in Asia, and another 5% living in Africa. The only way we can achieve that is not by flying everybody into Barcelona, but we have modules in Barcelona, we have modules in New York, we have modules in Shanghai, we have modules on the other coast. So in that program is probably the one where it happens the most, because it's by design. It's truly a global executive MBA. All of our other programs have, to some extent, access to those campuses and some modules there, right? So maybe you can extend on the.
I think there's a slide coming up where we go into a bit more detail regarding the structure of the full-time MBA. But maybe the highlight here would be that indeed it is rooted in our Barcelona campus that provides a very important unity of location when you think about our teaching method and what we're trying to achieve within the student body, which is, and this is not something I've mentioned before, but that the whole class gets to know each other, right? I mean, our ambition with 350 people in the 350 students in the full-time MBA is that everybody gets to know all of their classmates. And I think for that, having the whole first year in Barcelona is very important. But then in the second year, in terms 4 and 5, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, there's a lot of optionality, and it actually goes way beyond our campuses. We have a really world-class exchange program, and we have international modules that are available in Africa, in Brazil, in Shanghai and in New York. But a little bit more about that in a few slides.
All right.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, because Oliver would like you to ask talk a little bit more about how the teams work. Do you solve a case with a different team every time, or are you with the same team throughout the whole program?
Okay, maybe I'll start with the full-time MBA. So when we say that the team is the basic unit of learning at IESE, what that means is that in the case of the full-time MBA, and I understand that it is the same at for our executive programs, you get assigned to a team at the beginning of the program, and that team is designed to maximize diversity. So if you put yourself in the shoes of the admissions department, whether that is for an executive MBA or full-time, we bring in this very diverse class, but then if we randomly build teams or let students pick their own teams, we will probably not fully leverage that diversity. So we design the teams, I would say they're handmade, right? It's a very customized process. It's a very deliberate process of maximizing diversity within each team. You are part of a team and you cannot change. Well, it is very clear to us, it's actually the purpose of this whole exercise, that there may be friction based on differences in personality, cultural differences in backgrounds, but that is the very purpose of assembling these teams. We create teams of people that will, in the case of the full-time MBA, the first year, in the case of the executive programs during the whole program, meet every day of classes and discuss the cases that will later be discussed in class, first as a team. And it is actually also the case that your team becomes your life support system. The workload, as we highlighted earlier, is very high, and it is really by leveraging the diversity of profiles, the diversity of experience and viewpoints that exists in each team, that the outcome can be more than just the sum of individual contributions, right? What emerges is team performance and the team as a support system for each individual later in the classroom. But in the classroom, class participation is individual, and grading during the exams is as well. So the logic of the team is really that it provides you with the necessary support to deal with the course load and make friends, enemies maybe, resolve conflicts, experiment with multicultural management in a risk-free environment.
Yeah, well, let me add to that. Actually, the Global Executive MBA has just started. So actually, this afternoon I was having lunch with one of the teams, and in the Gamba the teams are slightly smaller, so it's a team of 6. There were 3 women. Basically, that was the only communal thing they had in common. So we looked around the table, and that's what we do by design, right? So everybody had a different cultural background. They were living in different continents, working in different industries, and also in different functions. So we had a nice conversation about how diverse the team is, but it's also true that if you're under pressure, you do a lot of, besides preparing for the classes, in the Gamba, they also have quite some team assignments. So many times under pressure, they need to deliver as a team, and then when the cultural differences are there, it takes some time to adjust. But that's a process, it's well supported, and once that works, actually you leverage each other's skills. So it becomes an amazing experience. So it's really cross-cultural, cross-functional experience throughout the program, and I think that's a commonality amongst all programs.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that, and I was surprised when I started working in admissions a few months ago. We even look at the GMATs in a full-time MBA to make sure that the full range of GMAT scores is equally distributed across the teams. So I was very surprised because that's a level of customization even I didn't expect. Should we move on?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So here's the slide detailing the full-time MBA. I will not go into too much detail, but basically what I'd like to highlight is that the full-time MBA is almost as if it consisted of 2 MBAs. We have the first year, which is very rigid in a positive way. We know exactly which is the core curriculum that needs to be taught. There are 3 terms and 3, I would say, clusters of subjects. right? You have them here. I don't know if everybody can read, but they're grouped by, in families of subjects, and you work your way through these classes as a class. Everybody has the same assignments, everybody has the same classes, and this is where, as I already reviewed it a couple of times, the pressure is very high. So much so that I would probably argue that our first year on a standalone basis is just as intensive, or at least as intensive, as some of the one-year MBA programs out there. I disagree with the notion that one-year MBAs are more intense simply because they're shorter. I think our first year is definitely a very, very intense experience. Then you have the summer break. Most students, and we're talking here about 85 to 90%, do a classical corporate internship. Corporate is perhaps a bit misleading because you have more and more people going to startups or small structures, but we cover the whole range of sectors and company types, all the way up to the bulge bracket banks and consulting firms and tech giants. We have a very powerful career services team looking after our MBA students. Nico headed that team up until a year ago. I worked there for 4 years myself. Obviously, it is a brilliant team, right? And then we have, since a few years, I think this was launched 5 years ago, the Summer Entrepreneurship Experience, which allows students, and you have between 10 and 50% of students doing this every year, to form small teams of 2, 3, 4 who will not dedicate their summer to writing a business plan, but actually come with a business plan prepared and receive mentoring from faculty, from investors. There's a IESE specific business angels network and a venture capital fund involved here, and also, of course, entrepreneurs from the alumni base that will accompany them throughout the summer in getting a business off the ground, and in some cases, some success cases, these businesses then survive into the second year and are further developed by students until graduation and beyond. The second year, and I'm going to try and be brief here, is all about customization, right? So you have a list of more than 100 electives to choose from. You have the exchange program, which allows you to go on exchange during your 4th or your 5th term. Our exchange agreements cover all the top schools in the world except Harvard and Stanford, who choose not to have an exchange program with anyone. Generally, everybody who wants to go on exchange goes on exchange. The question is really whether you get your first, second, or third choice. It's all allocated based on GPA by a very mechanical matching system. And then finally, you have these overseas modules that, as I said, take place in Nairobi, Sao Paulo, New York, and Shanghai, and which offer condensed elective classes related to the geography of the module, and then practical work with entrepreneurs or companies on the ground. And this is something widely popular with our student body. I could go on, but I think in the interest of time, maybe
time for questions. So I'll be brief. So basically, the Global Executive MBA has a unique structure. It builds upon the concepts that are clear in the school. So the first year is the core. We build the fundamentals. The second year is where you customize. The unique part in the Global Executive MBA, it's one class with 2 tracks. So while the class starts together in Barcelona, the second module, they actually can choose between Barcelona and New York, together in New York. One part goes to Barcelona, the other to New York. Shanghai together, Silicon Valley together. So as a result, we have a class of 40 to 50 students, where half of the class has most of the classes in the US, the other part has most of the classes or half of the classes in Europe. But as a result, we're able to get a group of professionals together from around the world. So we have a class from around the world that goes around the world. And very briefly, in the second year, there are 6 electives out of which you can choose 2. Basically, you can do an elective on every continent except for Australia, and then graduation in Barcelona. Maybe we can move on and go to questions, otherwise, no? Yeah, questions and answers.
So the first question is related to the Gemba. Considering the profile that you just described, what would be the main motivation of pursuing a global MBA? a global executive MBA?
The main purpose for pursuing a global
The main motivation.
Basically, the main motivation for our students is, besides the fact that they want the degree, the learning, and the transformation while they are mid-career, actually they also want to benefit from the global perspective and the global network, right? So by being in class with people from around the world, like you have in the full-time MBA, you get all these perspectives. And at the same time, it's not the same to discuss a case about Shanghai in Barcelona. No, we actually go to Shanghai, visit companies there, and get guest speakers from there. And the Google case, we actually literally do at Google. So the global perspective is probably the biggest differentiator in the global executive MBA, having all the commonalities with the other executive MBAs and MBAs out there.
Thank you. Natalia would like to know, what's the involvement of the school regarding post-MBA job hunting?
So I think there's an important distinction to be made here between executive programs and the full-time MBA. There's a whole range of resources that are offered our executive MBA students, which Nico will speak to in just a second. But I think it's important to remember that except in the case of being sponsored by your company, a full-time MBA requires you to resign from a job or take leave of absence, go without a salary for the duration, in our case of 19 months, and then return to the workforce. So none of this would work as smoothly as it does if we didn't have, as I said earlier, well-dimensioned career services team staffed with people who, to a very large extent, have done the full-time MBA themselves, and in many cases have acquired relevant post-MBA experience in the sectors that they are in charge of. So when I worked in career services, it was to look after financial services, covering specifically the banks that come and recruit on campus. And what I brought to the table is having done the MBA a few years earlier and having worked at Citigroup in London, and Citi being one of our main recruiters on campus, that I like to think allowed me to deliver a high quality counseling offering to the students. Now, the transition from being a first year student, getting support when you look for your internship, and then in the second year, when you look for your full-time job, into what happens when you're an alumnus is I would say, fluid. We just also because of our values and who we are and how we think of ourselves, we will never turn down a request for help. As a rule of thumb, we will walk with our graduates until they find their first post-graduation job. But then on an ad hoc basis, this very same career services team, also because it is so large, provides a lot of support to alumni down the road. But eventually, our alumni association takes over, and covering all programs has their own career services offering, personalized coaching available on demand, and of course, their own job board. I don't know if you want to speak to the executive programs.
Yeah, but I also want to touch on the career services part, because I was happy enough to be steering that for some time. Is we truly have one of the most amazing career services centers in the world, and I'm not exaggerating. It's a highly trained team of 20 professionals, most of them with deep sector experience, but more importantly, they care about the students, and there is no limit to the time they want to spend with our students. So there is a good structure there in place, both in terms of supporting the students with counseling and guidance and CV supports and all type of career management support. At the same time, there are the career fairs, and then there is the sector's experts, right? Part of that is because of the people in the full-time, they stop working. For the executive programs, people actually are working for their company. So whereas IESE will give support to them in some way or form, it's a different structure, because actually it's more about advancing in your career. So there, on a personalized basis, depending on the needs, we help people with their career.
Thank you. Marco points out that I've heard IESE is known for its personal approach. How does one benefit from that while doing a program?
Well, that is so across the board that in every aspect you touch on the school, you'll find out. It goes from the fact that everybody you come in touch with in the program will know you by name and background. and that everybody will go the extra mile for each and every one of our participants, because it's all about them. So this all comes back to the first point you mentioned about the mission, is if we preach humanistic values and being a better person and a better leader, that's what we practice with everybody here on campus. And I think that counts for everybody, from our professors who have an open door policy and are, I would say 24/7, but widely available to all of the students, to the staff, to the program management, to everybody.
Yeah, I think what I'd add to that is that it is actually reflected in the way we go about admissions, right? And that's equally true for our executive MBAs and for our full-time MBAs. The admissions process that we follow, I like to say, and take this with take the hint of irony here, but I like to say that it is extremely effective, but maybe not necessarily very efficient. And what I mean by that is that we have a tendency to over-interview. We have a tendency to want to get to know the people who apply really well before we make any decision on their application. There will never be a formula at work in discarding an application. We obviously look at the same fundamentals as our competitors do, but we really want to get to know the people from the very first steps of the application. And then maybe just for anecdotal value, I had a call just before this webinar with a prospective, maybe potentially one-day applicants who had a few questions about whether going to business school might be the right thing for him. And we spent 45 minutes discussing MBAs in general and how his specific background, which I'm not going to disclose, just out of respect for his privacy. Maybe he's even dialing in right now. But I had a 45-minute discussion with this person around whether an MBA would add value and allow him to achieve his professional goals. And we ended the conversation on a I'd say a medium note, right? I mean, we concluded that maybe an MBA was not necessary after all, and that came mostly from me. So I just spent 45 minutes talking someone out of applying to MBAs altogether. You might question whether that is a very good use of my time, but if you behave this way throughout your potential applicant base and over time, you make sure that you get the people who are the right fit for the institution. And that's what I mean by personalized attention from the very early steps on.
Let me add to that. And actually, that comes to the point is we don't only look if people fit the profile or meet certain requirements. We look at whether we can deliver on what they're looking for and if they can contribute to the class to the same extent. So it's truly about you.
Juan Sebastian is going to put you to the test a little bit with this one. I read you are both alumni. What major changes have you seen by IESE since you graduated?
Oh, that's huge. I mean, when I did the MBA in '95, we had 3 sections and one of them was international. Now we have 5 sections and all 5 of them are international.
Maybe an oversimplification of what has been happening at IESE in the past decades is that perhaps 30 years ago, IESE was predominantly a Spanish school. And then 20 years ago, it decided to become a European school, obviously with always a bit of input from other parts of the world. And then 10 years ago is really when the strategic decision to go fully global was made. And in the full-time MBA, that is neatly reflected, as Nico pointed out, in the number of sections, the fact that we've moved from teaching both in Spanish and English to teaching only in English, and also just the demographics of the program. When I was a student from 2008 to 2010, 1/3 of my class was still Spanish. Now we're down to 15%, and while during my time 60% of students were Europeans, now only 40% are. Right, so there's a very deliberate strategy of globalizing the different programs at our school. And again, as Nico pointed out earlier, in the case of the Global Executive MBA, that's inherent to the program itself. Right? And then I often get the question, maybe building on that, what the school does to stay in touch with latest trends in business and technology. I think if you look at the elective side of things, We've moved from perhaps 50, 55 electives when I was a student to over 100 now. I bumped into a second-year student who was on his way to campus a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him if he was happy with how the program was going, and he told me how excited he was about his design thinking elective and his urban planning elective, urban design I think it was called. And again, I'm the head of admissions, but I had no idea we have an urban design elective. So things move really fast, and IESE, I think this is something very pleasant when you work here. IESE is on a very clear growth path and expanding, at an impressive pace, I would say.
Thank you. And Esther would like to know, how does the global experience that you've been describing translate into job opportunities?
That's a great question.
It's an open question, so it would depend on where people are in their career, right? But in order to have a global career and to be able to function in a global environment, it all comes back to building trust, right? So if you work with people, it's about being able to trust people and for them to trust you. In order to do that, you need to be able to understand how the other person thinks. If that is from a completely different culture or background, that's the global perspective that the full-time MBA and the global executive MBA brings, right? By building a network from people around the world, by being, in the case of the global executive MBA, by going to the modules around the world, visiting companies from around the world. That's where also you can actually make your career more global.
Sorry. Just speaking to the full-time MBA specifically, I think that there are several answers to that question. One unpleasant truth about full-time MBAs, whether it's at IESE in Europe or in the US or elsewhere, is that while our institutions have become very good at creating this global classroom, labor markets remain regional at best, right? So there's no such thing as a global labor market. Now, what that means is that if you have a specific geographical goal, it is probably a good idea to do your full-time MBA in that geography, meaning that if you're extremely keen on working in Europe after graduation, doing a European program is the logical way to go. And conversely, if the aim was to start your career in the United States, probably you'd have to study in the United States. But the main limitation here is going to be immigration law, right? And immigration law, even in the European Union, is something that is decided and has specificities at the national level. Now, there is, and this is the other way to look at the same question, that there are ways of bridging that, right? And that is if you give yourself a little bit more time than just focusing on what happens after graduation. I think the question is, do you want to equip yourself with the kind of mindset, the type of skill set that will be in demand globally, and then to the same extent, does the school give you access to recruiting companies that operate globally? And maybe just to give specific examples, if somebody approached me and asked me about how to best launch a career in banking on Wall Street, at IESE, from an IESE standpoint, I would tell them, well, it is really not that complicated. By starting your career in London and then moving across the Atlantic a couple of years down the line. And we've seen it time and again. There's a Spaniard at Morgan Stanley who transferred within a year and a half. There's a Russian alumna who did the same move in as little as 1 year. You have a lot of examples of people who started their career in a global organization here in Europe and then took their career to Asia or to North America or Latin America in the following years, the years following graduation.
But let me add to that, and this is mostly for the full-time MBA, but while it's completely true that people, I mean, for once, we are a target school for many of the large corporations who come here to recruit globally, right? So they come to Barcelona, but they recruit for locations around the world. Now, it's also fair to say that most of these companies prefer local profiles with a global perspective, which they get here for the home markets. But having said that, our career services team also has people working for career services in two companies in Asia, still New York and Sao Paulo, but across the globe, talking to companies there, opening up opportunities for our students that are keen on going there. And that is something, I don't know any other business school is able to say, that they have career services people dedicated to looking at job opportunities for students in those locations.
Yeah. And maybe one last statistic, and this is really just putting the numbers behind what Nico just said. I mentioned earlier that 60% of our class comes from outside of Europe. 40% of the job opportunities graduates secure are outside of Europe, which means that IESE is equipped to help students from all around the world to secure full-time employment in Europe. But there's the necessary infrastructure to help Europeans go after opportunities outside, and obviously also cater to the specific needs of people who want to remain in the non-European regions of origin. Is that it from the question side?
Yes, because most of the other questions are very specific and are very detail oriented to the application process of each program. So we do recommend that you first familiarize yourself with our website, and then you can always find the contact information and reach out, and we will make sure to answer you as soon as possible.
Yeah,
no problem.
And on that personal approach we mentioned before, just feel free to reach out to any of the admissions teams through the website. And we're more than happy to answer any questions that people have on the process, on what program is the right program for you, or why do an MBA at IESE.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.